So NetEase and Blizzard have announced that most Blizzard games will stop working in China on January 23rd. So that's a big deal. NetEase, so if you're not aware at all, NetEase is a company that distributes Blizzard games in China. And in China, because of how the government regulates things, you need a company on the inside to be able to get you licenses and approvals and stuff like that and distribute your game out to other people in China. China's a massive market. I mean, could I possibly overstate it? I'm not sure I could. It's a fucking huge market. And a lot of their stuff is just, I assume, going offline on January 23rd. But they haven't actually talked about the details, so I don't know whether it goes offline or whether it's just, I don't know, more difficult to access or whatever. But the games that are affected are World of Warcraft, StarCraft, Hearthstone, Heroes of the Storm, Overwatch, and Diablo 3. Diablo Immortal has a different agreement and will continue. But essentially what's broken down is Blizzard's negotiation with NetEase, this company, and NetEase are the second biggest gaming company. I wanted to say tech company there, but I'm not sure that that's correct. It might be correct, though. I'm not 100% on that, but they're a bloody big company anyway. And their license was set to expire in January 23rd and had to be renegotiated for renewal. And the talks have broken down. So if you want to look at some quotes here, it's like, we put in a great deal of effort and tried with our utmost sincerity to negotiate with Activision Blizzard, but there were material differences on key terms. We could not reach an agreement. We hold high regard in our product and operational standards and abide by our commitments to Chinese players. A little sly dig. It does not seem like this was an amicable split by any means. If you want to go on to the next thing is this Bloomberg article, which is talking about the split. No, thank you. Don't want to listen to that music of Patek Philippe. Do you think I have the money to buy a Patek Philippe? Not happening. In this article, though, written by the person that I recognize anyways, Jason Schreier, who writes a lot of good esports-based articles, said, beyond the financial terms, key sticking points to the NetEase extension were ownership of intellectual property and control of the data of millions of players across China. People familiar with the discussion said, I honestly can't even read between the lines there. I don't know what that might mean in terms of what the sticking points were, what Blizzard wasn't happy to allowed to happen or not, or wanted more payment for, or whatever there. But something broke down, apparently, with regards to ownership of intellectual property and control of Chinese players' data. So that's somewhat interesting. You also have... Oh, they also referenced during this article, this Bloomberg article, which goes into a lot of detail, they referenced in the earnings meeting that they had warned investors. So this is the earnings meeting, which happened something, like 2 weeks ago at this point. I think it was like the 7th of November, something like that. And it says here, currently we have licensing agreements with a third party covering the publication of several Blizzard titles in China. These agreements contributed approximately 3% of Activision Blizzard's consolidated net revenues. So it's not a huge amount by the sound of it. But they are set to expire. We're in discussions, but a mutually satisfactory deal may not be reached. So they've known for a little while before they announced it that it was unlikely that these were going to end well. You've also got this weird part where Simon Zhu, the president of global investment and partnerships at NetEase, posted on LinkedIn this really weird, cryptic fucking message as a gamer who spent 10,000 hours in the world of Azeroth, StarCraft, and Overwatch. I feel so heartbroken that I will no longer have access to my account and memories next year. And then, one day, when what has happened behind the scene could be told, developers and gamers will have a whole new level of understanding of how much damage a jerk can make. Huh? The fucking drama's happening on LinkedIn? I mean, guys, we don't need Twitter anymore. Leave Elon to his crazy shit. Just let Trump ramble into the abyss. Let's all move to LinkedIn, where the drama's happening. Let's all converse with each other via LinkedIn posts. What the fuck? When is this? Is this just a secret world of corporate shit-talking that I've never been aware of? I've got a LinkedIn. I haven't updated it ever. It still says that I write for over.gg, I think. I haven't seen LinkedIn posts. No, I've got no idea what's going on. But yeah, apparently I need to be looking at LinkedIn more, I guess. As a consequence of this, though, there have been consequences, and this is where I want to dial into Overwatch specifically, rather than talking about the other stuff. So, Overwatch 2, Overwatch 2 Season 2, I should say, which is like, you know, they release a new hero. I actually don't know exactly what they're going to release because I haven't been keeping up with Overwatch, but, you know, it's a bit like Valorant where they release, oh, here's a new hero, here's a new map, here's some other stuff. Apparently that is still going to be available to Chinese players, and they've said, Blizzard said in their announcement that they will let the Chinese players know how it's going to work, this entire process. So that makes it sound like it's not exactly just going to go offline on January 23rd, but maybe it just will. I don't really know. And all of this might end up just with them finding an organization. It might just be posturing. Finding an agreement, sorry, it might just be posturing. But it has disrupted already the Overwatch League plans. So Sean Miller on Twitter tweeted out, due to the latest regional licensing updates, which is what we're just talking about, we're delaying the start of the free agency period to fairly significantly later to give teams and players additional time to prepare. On top of that as well, you have... oh yeah, this is just them talking about how, so in case you wanted to look at the quote, it says, basically they're like, we're really grateful for the Chinese community, and Chinese players will be receiving details of how this will work soon. Cool. Literally no information given. In terms of the Overwatch League though, right? There are quite a number of Chinese players. There's 18, at least as far as I can count, because I haven't been keeping track really. But I think there's 18 Chinese players split across 4 teams. Chengdu, Guangzhou, Hangzhou, and the LA Valiant. If you're a Valorant fan, don't even get me started there. Yes, the Los Angeles team is a Chinese organization. No, I don't want to explain it. Shanghai, I know that it's also free agency, and essentially people have let all of these players go into free agency at this point as well. But I mean last year, right? Like the number of the size of the Chinese player base within Overwatch League. That's why I'm saying these 18 players. But also you've got this organization, Shanghai Dragons, who, even if you don't know anything about Overwatch, you might have heard of Shanghai. The team that went 0-40, and then they won the league last year. Oh, it's crazy. I mean, you know, etc., etc. This team is actually owned by NetEase. That's the company that Blizzard has failed to reach an agreement with. They own the Shanghai Dragons, which always seemed like a horrendous conflict. Like that was never going to end well. And here we are. So I have no idea how that's going to impact that relationship as well. It might be that NetEase act spitefully and try and pull out. I don't know how long the legal requirements to actually stay involved in the Overwatch League are, but I assume they continue into next year because people are planning for next year, and I feel like they would have pulled the plug. At least some organizations would have pulled the plug if they weren't contractually obligated to continue with the project. And yeah, just a very unusual scenario in total here. I also wanted to, so yeah, if we take a look back here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how reliant these companies are on each other, right? Because I think that that's important when you're thinking about these negotiations and how it's actually going to impact them. So it says, we already talked about the Blizzard one, right? Blizzard claimed that the partnership accounted for 3% of its net revenue last year, which is quite a small amount considering how large the Chinese market is. But I don't really know too much about their details in terms of where their revenue streams come from and whether that's, you know, ignoring other things, you know, like maybe they're ignoring skin sales there. Maybe they're just talking about game sales, but they're ignoring like the fact that Chinese players buy the skins. Listen, I don't know. But Blizzard claims that the partnership accounts for about 3% of their net revenue from last year. NetEase says here that the net revenue and net income contribution from these licensed Blizzard games represented low single digits as a percentage of NetEase's total net revenues and net income. What does low single digits mean? I don't know, below 5. So maybe a comparable number that both are claiming. And it says the expiration of licenses will have no material impact on NetEase's financial results. However, their stock dropped by about 15% in Hong Kong as soon as this was announced, which maybe is just people speculating that it's worse than it seems. Maybe they know a lot more than I do. I don't know. But the stock dropped fairly significantly, actually, on the result of this news being broken. And I think one of the things to talk about here in terms of Overwatch is that it will affect how Overwatch works. If Overwatch is forced to go offline in China on January 23rd, or frankly at any time next year, even if they try to sign a licensing agreement with another partner, let's say Tencent, for example, you still, as far as I'm aware, have to get approved all over again for the game. It's not like you say to the Chinese government, hey, you already approved this game, it's cool, right? Haha, just let it go again. No, you have to go to the back of the fucking queue. There are thousands of games in the queue to get processed, and the processing queue for the Chinese government to authorize game releases has been absurdly slowed down after a recent crackdown on, like, gaming in general and the tech sector in general. Think about Valorant. Valorant is still not released in China after, as far as I know, beginning the process before the game was released. And I've talked to some of the people at Riot about that process. I'm not going to share, any details, but it sounds like a fucking awful process, and not from Riot's side. I believe that Epic have also just straight up given up on Fortnite ever being released in China after trying to get that released there for years and years. So it's not an easy system, and you're not guaranteed to even get through. And here's what else I want to talk about, right? This is what took me hours last night too. Chinese viewership has been propping up the Overwatch League metrics since 2020. And I swear no one talks about it. No, anyone talking about it? Any motherfuckers talking about anything over here? No, they're not. So let's go through some numbers, okay? Let's do a deep dive into this shit. Okay. So, I've got my little notepad file. It's very low tech, but I'm going to take you through it, right? So, here, I'm just going to essentially read this out and kind of go through what I've written down. Chinese viewership has been propping everything up, and I'm using the grand finals metrics that Overwatch League themselves have been talking about here, right? So these aren't like reported by ES Charts or any of that shit. This is Overwatch League themselves reporting these numbers, okay? So these should look the most favorable to Overwatch League, right? There's no question of me fucking... there's no question of these numbers being smaller than reality. If anything, they'll plump them up a little bit, because one of the things they do... Anyway, we'll get to that later, but one of the things they do is include 24 hours of replay viewership. Anyway, in 2019, when things were on Twitch, when they were broadcasting on ABC as well, things looked great for the US audience. They had, for the grand finals, and these numbers are all average minute audience. So basically, if you're only familiar with Twitch or YouTube or stuff like that, that's just your average viewers. There's nothing scary or weird about average minute audience. It's just average viewers, right? So for the grand finals, they had a global audience of 1.1 million for the grand final, of which 34% was Chinese viewership, 386,000. 42% of the viewership was from the US, which is extremely important for being able to sell things effectively for sponsors, because US viewers are really highly sought after, especially in a certain age demographic, which the Overwatch League hit very well in 2019. And then the rest of the world accounted for 23% of the viewership as well. So the US is a very large proportion of that, right? But like you've seen on the screen here, a large proportion of those US viewers were on linear television. And you can track this. They don't say this outright, but you can track this by doing the calculations on the numbers that they have given out in these years. So, they were really happy about the fact that, digital viewership grew by 87% in 2020. Well, if you do that backwards, you can find out what the digital viewership was in 2019. And you can see that 62% of the US viewers were watching on their television. I'm not sure how many of them even knew really what they were watching. Some of it might have been just ABC playing across, various different bars and hotels and stuff like that. Some of it's just your grandpa tuning in and going like, what the fuck is this? And Some of it might be people excited that they can watch it on TV, so they go and watch it with their parents. That happened a lot in 2019 for the Overwatch League. So it doesn't mean that all of it was accidental viewership by any means, but it wasn't carried forward into the future because there weren't any linear deals anymore, because they didn't have television deals after Disney XD, ESPN, and ABC went by the wayside. So what this means is that in 2020, the exclusive rights were sold to YouTube. There was no linear broadcast deal, like I said, no ABC, no ESPN, no Disney XD, that kind of thing. The league also went offline due to COVID for a long time, actually. They lost all the momentum. The homestand model just exploded, and the league had to relaunch after a while with, crucially, consistent games in the Asian time zones so that they're easier for Chinese and Korean viewers to watch. But in 2020, the viewership just shit the fucking bed in Overwatch League. But it was completely propped up by China. Look at these figures. 90% of the viewership for the grand final were Chinese viewers. If you remember that year, it was the year where we sent 4 teams to Seoul. And the 4 teams, it was Philly, Shock, Shanghai, and Seoul. And they played each other in a double elimination bracket. And then the grand final was Shock, Shanghai, I think, if I remember correctly. And Shock won. Yeah, it was the hog meta. Yeah. And 90% of the viewers were Chinese. 1.39 million Chinese viewers, representing a 2.6x increase in in how many viewers had previously been watching, because it was in their local time zone. It was a big game happening when they didn't have to wake up in the middle of the night, you know? And the rest of the world, I mean, look at that. Down 80%. Can you just think about that for a moment? Like, the rest of the world, US and everywhere else, down 80%. Oh, it was Shock versus Seoul. You're right. Sorry, I forgot. It wasn't Shock Shanghai. It was Shock versus Seoul. Yeah, it was Gesture versus Gesture versus Super on the hog. Yeah, but down 80%, both in terms of US and European rest of world viewership, basically, which is incredible. But that was also because of the time zone difference too, right? Because it wasn't happening in a time zone that was conducive to people watching it live at all. So yeah, it was like 5 a.m. or something like that. The time zone difference made such a massive difference, but also people just stopped watching a lot. A lot of people in the US stopped watching because of the move to YouTube, because of the loss of homestands, because COVID had just changed people's schedules so massively. And look at this. This is a loss of 580,000 viewers. This negative 79% represents a loss of 580,000 viewers from outside of China. That is the same as, it didn't happen in this exact way, but that's equivalent to the year before losing every viewer that was watching on TV and over half of the people that were watching on Twitch. Boom, in a year, gone. And all propped up by a massive increase in Chinese viewership. In 2021, the trend also continues. Western viewership, however, did rebound for the grand finals. It was happening in a more reasonable time zone, and the league was starting to get its feet back under it a little bit. So the rest of the world viewership goes up by 40%, and Chinese viewership stays roughly the same, still accounts for 87% of grand finals viewership. And remember throughout all of this as well, right? Remember throughout all of me saying this, that Chinese viewership data has historically not been trusted particularly too. The increases and decreases make sense because of what was happening to the Overwatch League at this point. And, crucially, the data that Overwatch League is getting from their Chinese partners is coming from the back end and is super different to you just logging onto Bilibili and seeing that there's 5 million people watching. Those are not even slightly the same thing. So this is, as far as Blizzard and Overwatch League is concerned, accurate data, as long as you trust that Bilibili and Huya and the other Chinese broadcast partners are reporting their data accurately. But that is something that a lot of people have had issues with in the past. For 2022, you can't actually tell yet. ES Charts hasn't released any data about the grand finals, but like I said, I haven't been using ES Charts. The league hasn't released any data about the grand finals either. There was obviously an improved viewership on YouTube. It was massively improved on YouTube. I would theorize that that's probably lopsided. Like, it went up a lot on YouTube, but it probably didn't go up by the same percentage in Chinese viewership. Maybe it did, though. Hard to know. But looking at the playoffs reported by ES Charts. So this is the first time I'm using ES Charts, remember, and they use their data. They work their data slightly differently. So if we want to talk about how they work their data, actually, ES Charts only looks at the live average viewers, and Overwatch League looks at live plus their rebroadcast that happens within the next 24 hours. I think that that's quite a large assumption on Overwatch League's part, that the viewers that tune into the rebroadcast are unique and didn't watch it live, right? You could end up getting counted twice there if you both watch it live and you watch the rebroadcast. Their assumption is that people don't do that, and it's people that weren't, like it's the live event is happening at a bad time zone, and therefore you watch it on the rebroadcast instead. So they put both of those together, which is why their reported average audience is significantly higher than the ES Charts reported, even when they're just looking at, non-Chinese viewership. Then, of course, Overwatch League adds Chinese viewership onto that and normally separates it. So that's the difference. But anyway, even if you look at ES Charts, right, and you're not judging by Blizzard self-reported viewership, the 2020 playoffs, very, very low, unbelievably low. And remember that this is only, this is what they reported the average audience to be on YouTube. So 60K, 85, 84K. And then this year, massive increase, massive increase. So yeah, plus 158% increase this year of the YouTube average audience. But they haven't released average audience for the grand finals, which was what I was using to compare. But this is massive. If the grand finals average audience went up proportionally to that, you'd be looking at an average minute audience that the Overwatch League would self-report of about 560,000, which seems too high, especially when the live peak was like 400K. But they can be larger, like I said, because about 40%, maybe a bit less than that, maybe it's more like 25, something like that. It's really difficult to tell. But a significant portion do watch on the rebroadcast afterwards, and that's why they get added in. But like I said, those might be the same viewers. Anyway, but for the purposes of just finding out what percentage of the viewership this year is Chinese viewership, let's assume, best case scenario, that there were a fuck ton of people watching on YouTube, right? So let's give them full credit. Massive amounts of people watching on YouTube. 564,000 average people watching the grand finals on YouTube. Let's make that assumption. So in that case, if we assume that the Chinese viewership remains static, that would still give us that China's responsible for 72% of the viewership. For the Chinese viewership not to be the majority for the first time since 2019, viewership in China would have to drop by 60%. Like 600,000 people would just have to decide not to watch. Actually, it might be more than that. Maybe I've fucked that. Yeah, I've definitely fucked that up, haven't I? What is that, like 800,000 people? Yeah, it's like 800,000. I don't know. Trying to do math in my head. I should have just done this beforehand. But anyway, the Chinese viewership would have to drop by over 60% in order for the YouTube viewership to be 50-50 with it. So, like I'm saying, massive reliance on Chinese views in order to get the metrics that they're looking for. Even in the, like I've said here, even in the most lopsided Western-focused view, it relies so heavily on Chinese viewership. But crucially here too, the Chinese viewers are not going to be valued in the same way that those potentially like US viewers or viewers that are from other countries that have large amounts of spending power and do tend to spend money on merchandise, on tickets, on things that the sponsors are selling, whether that be fucking Butterfingers or whatever else. So the reason that esports has been a lucrative investment for so long is because it taps into that 18 to 34-year-old from the USA or from the UK or from other similarly wealthy countries, and they can be monetized effectively. So the loss of the Chinese... So the reason that I'm even bringing this up in the first place, obviously, or at least I find it obvious, is that if you can't play the fucking game in China, you bet your ass less people are going to be watching it happen, right? Like, people are not going to be watching the game if they can't play it. They're going to move on to different stuff. And if it leads to a massive decline in Chinese viewership, the overall viewership is going to plummet. That means there's literally no chance of selling any kind of broadcast rights deal to the Huyas and the Bilibis and the stuff like that. It also means that whatever sponsorship deals you have that are interested in your Chinese viewership, small though they may be, you won't really be able to sell against that either. And you just won't have the same appetite for your APAC broadcasts at all either. It's going to be hard to justify running large amounts of broadcasts that happen in the favored time zone of Chinese viewers that don't exist anymore. And if you're interested in what I was using for the metrics, it's stuff like this, where they've reported the 2019 numbers, they've reported the 2020 numbers. There's a Forbes article here where they reported the 2021 numbers as well. Stuff like that. And the only thing from this year is Sean Miller saying the grand finals officially broke Owl's all-time live global viewership record. That's the only thing. So all that means is, you know, it got more than 1.68 million average viewers. But I mean, that doesn't mean that it got a crazy amount more. That doesn't mean that it got 2 more. You know, it's just a certain amount more. So I think it's the other thing to mention, actually, that I didn't grab because it was from today, in fact, was that Arnold, I don't even know what he is, actually. Is he the CEO or something? Yeah, Arnold is the Seoul Dynasty CEO. Posted this after I'd already done the research for this, but he's posting in his Discord for the Seoul Dynasty, talking about the decision process. And one of the reasons at the moment that the free agency is just going crazy in Overwatch League, they're just letting everybody go because there's too much uncertainty about what the APAC League even looks like, right? They don't know whether the Chinese players, presumably... Well, listen, I'm speculating here, right? I'm not saying that I've heard this from somebody like Arnold, but when you look at his final sentence here, APAC without China just doesn't make sense for Owl. I would speculate that they don't know whether Chinese players are going to be able to be involved. They don't know if Chinese organizations are going to want to be involved. They don't know. I mean, people are cutting back based on the recession anyway, or a looming recession. So a lot of teams are just releasing their players because they don't feel comfortable paying them competitive salaries based on the precedents of the prior years. And they're just releasing them into free agency and hoping that they can pick them up, you know, later for cheaper. But it seems like there is a huge amount of uncertainty hovering over this offseason. And one of the big things is this news around Blizzard and NetEase not being able to come to a resolution. How this really plays into the Microsoft deal as well, I have no idea. That is just way beyond my pay grade. But yeah, I'm sure people who are more in the know might be able to inform.